Good evening and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Symposium. I'm Diane Sayre, president of the LaRouche Organization, and tonight we are going to be talking with Richard Freeman, and I should say it's June 20th. Best to make sure people know what day it is because events are happening so rapidly. It is June 20th and we are live. Rich Freeman, who is part of the economics team at Executive Intelligence Review, a historian, longtime LaRouche associate, is going to be talking about something called Operation Unthinkable, but we'll get to that in a minute. Obviously, or what's on people's minds, what should be on people's minds, is the fact that we have a very precarious situation in Southwest Asia at the moment, with Israel's bombing now for a week of Iran, the retaliation by Iran against Israel, some very dangerous questions about when do we cross the threshold. Will Israel use the nuclear weapons that everyone knows that they have if they feel that they are losing, if the United States does not get involved? Can this thing be calmed down? And of course, if the United States would work closely with Russia and China, in this case, particularly with Russia, there's every reason to believe that the crisis could be averted, that Putin has already said they can make certain agreements with Iran on enrichment of uranium for nuclear energy. Russia has good relations also with Israel, although they've been extremely sharp in denouncing Israel's illegal war of aggression, its illegal action of bombing Iran when Iran had not attacked Israel or indicated that they were going to in the first place. But nonetheless, Russia could also help guarantee the security of Israel. So will President Trump do this, or is he going to be trapped and goaded on by the British in particular? There's a series of former MI6 directors who are saying, just go for it, get it over with, as if this is something that would be easy, as if Iran doesn't have 92 million people, as if their nuclear research facilities are not deep, deep underground, and that to bomb them is going to require actually an enormous amount of aircraft and investment, and chances are very good that it won't even be successful. Are we prepared to have a ground war? Trump says no. So it's extremely precarious and unpredictable, and really, we should not be here. Everyone knows that the president of the United States could have put Netanyahu in his place some time ago. We could have stopped the genocide, which is still ongoing now in Gaza. And we have, in the last 2 days, the spectacle of the Israelis claiming that Iran has committed war crimes by striking a hospital. I agree, hospitals should not be targets, but the truth of the matter is Iran was actually striking some kind of Mossad or intelligence outpost. The hospital had actually been largely evacuated for days. Even the Israelis admit that some people were injured, but it was because of the shock wave, not the strike. When you compare that to what the Israelis have done to hospitals in Gaza, including one particular facility where they had the only kidney dialysis units, and after striking that medical center, the Israelis returned to make sure that every last dialysis unit was destroyed. That's a war crime. But this could be stopped. It needs to be stopped. If President Trump gets sucked into this trap, if we don't all end up dead in a thermonuclear war, the very least you can say is that his presidency will certainly be ruined. His support base will leave him, and the United States will collapse economically, and who knows what will happen with the price of oil and everything else. Now, Helga Zepp-LaRouche gave an interview to RIA Novosti, and I would like to share what she said about this. She said the United States, China, and Russia should intensify direct dialogue between their presidents. But the only force that could change the balance of power is the countries of the global majority. She said if they, representing 85% of the world's population, loudly and jointly condemned the warmongers and offered cooperation within the framework of a new architecture of global security and development, they could change the situation. And she said, in order to stop the escalation, it is necessary for people around the world, including the United States, to realize what nuclear war is. That is why this is me speaking now. Tulsi Gabbard's video of June 10th about the bombing of Hiroshima and what happened to people in that is very timely and important for this situation. She said, in connection with the escalation of the conflict, the danger to the existence of humanity has never been higher. Now, I should also say, while we are speaking, today President Putin addressed the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. I believe there's 140 or more nations represented there, 20,000 people or more. This is a very big deal. It really puts the lie to the idea that Russia is isolated. They are not isolated. Everybody wants to come there and engage in economic policies. I do not at this time have all of the details of what Putin said, but one aspect of what he was talking about is a new framework for growth of the world. He said that there needs to be a new global model of growth. He talked about a dialogue held in Russia to discuss this. He said Russia invites its partners to contribute to the formation of a new global growth model that will ensure the security of our countries and the stable development of the entire world for many, many years to come. Sounds a little bit like what Helga Zepp-LaRouche is saying. Now, to do this requires that we defeat the British Empire. And while more and more people are now coming to realize that Lyndon LaRouche was 120% correct on his characterization of the British Empire as the enemy of the United States and the planet, what you're about to hear, I think, will help you to understand why that was so very accurate and perhaps a precursor to what we're dealing with today. So I'd like to welcome Richard Freeman, and please go ahead, tell us what we should know about this, or at least some of it.
Okay. Yes. Thanks, Diane. And I always enjoy being on this show. So, as Diane indicated, the world is beset by several wars. First, this Israeli attack on Iran, backed by Britain and apparently, but suicidally, by the United States, which could see, in the worst case, U.S. President Donald Trump order a B-52 to drop a GBU-57 massive ordnance, which is a 30,000-pound bunker buster bomb, on Iran's Fordow nuclear equipment enrichment plant, which is built into the side of the mountain. There could be a further eruption of the British coalition of the willing NATO proxy war in Ukraine. There could be the Taiwan-China tension revved up, in which forces of the West are continuously arming Taiwan and urging it to declare independence. All these three examples that I've just mentioned of wars or potential wars or ongoing wars, despite their different political setting and locations, have something in common. A prevailing military doctrine which includes two prominent elements. One, endless permanent wars spreading and being built up militarily. And second, combined with the threat of the deployment of nuclear weapons, of which there are reportedly 16,000 in the world, many sitting aboard planes or in submarines, which could be launched within less than 12 hours' notice. This doctrine of permanent endless wars, with the ready threat of nuclear weapon deployment, will, if deployed, destroy the world many times over. But this utopian doctrine of combined dual permanent war and nuclear weapons did not develop with the RAND Corporation or the 1957 U.S. Operation Drop Shot or Donald Rumsfeld and Paul Wolfowitz, or many other candidates who did a lot of evil things. This doctrine is British, and it began with Britain's Winston Churchill, who has been rightly called the beast man of the 20th century. Churchill was produced and controlled by the British financier oligarchy and the monarchy. He was a race imperialist, a leading member of the British Eugenics Society, an open supporter of Benito Mussolini and Francisco Franco, and up until 1937 was praising Adolf Hitler in the British press as representing strong leadership. But above all, there are two things that we can say about Churchill. One, he was a strong supporter, director, and so-called savior of the British Empire, which over 5 centuries carried out the destruction and degradation of colonial populations, which caused hundreds of millions of deaths. Second, he sought the destruction of Russia, and he despised the United States, especially Franklin D. Roosevelt. So I'd like to now go to the slides, if we could, to give some of this. There's a tremendous amount. I'll try and keep it condensed and focused on the most important features. But this was really the fight of what we were going to be in the world post-World War II. Imperialist system, or a system of growth and development and security architecture. So if we could show the first one, David, or is it up? I can't see. Is it displayed?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I can't see them. Is there any way to make it a little larger? If not, I'll just go from my sets.
We can see it, but
okay.
I guess you can't. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to then go to the second one. This is the title I'm making it is The Origin of Today's Anglo-American NATO Plan to Dismember Russia. The second one is a slide, and it's a quote from Lyndon LaRouche on Churchill. April 12, 1945 is the date of the untimely death of U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt. As it turned out, his death changed the course of world history very much for the worse. Prime Minister Winston Churchill and what Churchill represented took over. Most of the hellish moments through which the world has lived since that date are the rotten fruit of Churchill's untimely political victory over his political opponent, Roosevelt. Now, what we're going to look at is something called Operation Unthinkable. If you think you didn't learn about this in school, you are right. If you think over the last 5 years of heightened world threats of nuclear war, this was never mentioned to you, you are right. So what is Operation Unthinkable? The next one, please. Good. So this is something that got from the British National Archives. It's the cover sheet of Operation Unthinkable. And you can see written in hand the viewpoint of the people who wrote it. It says Russia, threat to Western civilization. That's the premise of Operation Unthinkable. So what it is that in mid-April of 1945, Churchill orders the British Joint Chiefs of Staff, 4 people, and a few of their planning staff members, to draw up a plan for the massive attack, dismemberment, and elimination of Russia. U.S. and Russia are supposed to be allies of Britain. The war has not ended. And he's already planning a World War III with this is Churchill, with the intention to destroy Russia. Now, what was this going to look like? So next, please. This is what the plan looks like. You can't read it. I can't read it. But it's Operation Unthinkable, Office of the Minister of Defense, Winston Churchill. Churchill was Prime Minister and Defense Minister. So we're going to put this into, you can see the corners are frayed and all that. We're going to put this onto slides that you can read. So the next one, please. It says Operation Unthinkable, report by the Joint Planning Staff. So the Joint Planning Staff were about some 7 to 8 people who were the planners in British military, who reported to the 4 members of the British Joint Chiefs of Staff, who reported to Churchill. No one in the British government knew of this plan. No one in the United States knew of this plan. The president wasn't informed, the Congress wasn't informed, the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight Eisenhower was not informed. So they say, we have examined Operation Unthinkable. These are all their caps. Indents are theirs, quotes are theirs, and everything like that. I just put it into a readable format. As instructed, we have taken the following assumptions. And you'll see point E, the date for the opening of hostilities is July 1st, July 1945. So this plan, which was demanded in April of 1945, was produced by the Joint Chiefs of Staff by May 22nd of 1945 and handed to Churchill. And the plan for the war was to start a month and a half afterwards. Now, this war, I will just say, was massive. From the planning documents, what I've been able to determine, and I'll show it to my friend Carl Osgood, who's very good at this stuff, it looks like they had 500,000 to over 1 million men. They had 12,000 planes, 7,000 planes. This is gigantic. And it was to form an allied army. It would include Britain, the United States, who knew nothing of this. All the quotes you're going to see referring to the United States knows nothing of, because this was never sent to the United States. Poland, and at least 10,000 and perhaps many tens of thousands more of German POWs who had just been captured, who were in prisoner of war camps, who had been fighting for the Wehrmacht, and they were going to be turned around and pointed towards the Russians, who they had just been fighting. Next, please. Now, what are some of the goals of this? Okay, so they have in the report, these are the subheads. Object. The overall or political object is to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and British Empire. Every time you see United States, remember, the United States has not agreed to this because they don't even know it exists. But Churchill thought that with the death of Roosevelt on the 12th of April, he would bring in Truman. He knew he could manipulate Truman. Truman was going to be his flunky. So this is what they say, and I won't go through all the quotes. It's got reports, it's got battle plans, it's got truth strengths. We won't go through that tonight. Quote, a quick success might induce the Russians to submit to our will, at least for the time being, but it might not. This is for the Russians to decide. If they want total war, they are in a position to have it. This is arrogant. The Russians haven't asked for any war. They don't know this attack is occurring. Then it says, the only way in which we can achieve our objective with certainty and lasting results is total war. And then they say in point A, 3A, total war is necessary. This is a hypothesis we have examined. Next, please. These are all Operation Unthinkable. I just put them so people can read it. Now, this one, total war. So you're going to now learn what total war is. Apart from the chances of revolution in the USSR and the political collapse of the present regime, of which we are not competent to express an opinion, but which they wanted, just like they want the government of Khamenei and Pezeshkian in Iran to fall, just as and so forth. But they're just being, quote, diplomatic. And get the next one. The elimination of Russia can only be achieved. That's what this report is. The elimination of Russia. This is no ordinary document. And then they say the occupation of such areas of metropolitan Russia that the war-making capacity of the country will be reduced to a minimum point. The major metropolitan areas of Russia that they have war-making capacity are all the leading cities. Such a decisive defeat of the Russian forces in the field as to render impossible for the USSR to continue the war. Now you go on. Next, please. However, what does total war mean? Total war is, let's look at point 6. There is virtually no limit to the distance to which it would be necessary for the Allies to penetrate into Russia to render it resistance impossible. And then next one, because I'm just going to quote them briefly here. We'll try and make them available in publications and elsewhere. To achieve the decisive defeat of Russia, this is point 8, in a total war. Total war is permanent war. It's endless war. It's perpetual war. This is being defined for the first time as a doctrine, probably used before, by Churchill and the British Joint Chiefs of Staff. The deployment in Europe of a large portion of the vast resource in the United States. But it says, if it's to be achieved, and this is point 9A, then we will lasting results. the defeat of Russia in the total war would be necessary. Next, please. This is the conclusion. And what they say is, I didn't have this quote here, this will spread to Asia. It will engulf the parts of the world. It will involve many, many years. A war that engulfs part of Asia, that will be many, many years, that will have this size, that will be preemptive, is the utopian vision of what we call permanent war, perpetual war. This is the doctrine which is being applied today. Now, these are the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sir Alan Brooke, he's the head of the Navy, Army, excuse me. Vice Count Alan Brooke, blah, blah, blah. Sir Andrew Cunningham, First Lord of the Sea, he's the head of the Navy. Sir Douglas Eville, he's the Vice Chair of the Air Staff. He's the head of the Air Force. And Sir Hastings Ismay, he is extremely important. Baron Ismay was the Chief of Staff to Winston Churchill in 1940 to 45. When Churchill sets up Operation Unthinkable, he makes Ismay the Secretary of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to push this policy through. In 1949, NATO is created, which Churchill played a leading role in. In 1952, they announced the post of Director General. Churchill and many of the imperialists and British financiers lobby heavily, and the person who's made the first Secretary General of NATO is Sir Hastings Ismay, the man who helped develop Operation Unthinkable. This is how, and there were other means, this policy got into NATO. It's there at the beginning. Churchill marched it in through the front door. So we know Sir Mark Rutte, and we know all the other people who have been the heads of NATO, but this was there in 1952. Next, please. Now, I just want to mention very quickly, this shows you Crimea. The 1853 to 1856 Crimean Wars. You will notice that, as the chart shows, Crimea is 2,000 miles away from Britain. So what's Britain doing in Crimea? Well, they ran a siege of Sevastopol between 1853 and 1854, an 11-month siege, starved out the Russians, and led to the Russians suing for peace. So the British have been in this business for a while. Next, please. But Churchill, who is a complete Russophobe, is too light a thing. He's a genocidalist. He is a beast man. These are the pictures. I'm sorry they're not great. I'll try and get better ones. World War II is World War I. People may remember. It's done in November 1918. But that's the formal end of World War I. What happens was there were between 50 and 100,000 troops in Russia. They were the White Army against the Red Army. Supposedly. Churchill's appointed as Minister of War. And for 2 years, he runs an invasion of Russia. This is hardly reported also in the history books. But this was an attempt to dismember Russia. Now, it's very hard to see, but just take my word that those lines that are partially green with little dots next to them, those are fronts. So you can see one is up in Archangel in Murmansk, up in the north, in the Kola Peninsula, and another one is near Riga, and you can see Petrograd goes down into Romania. Another one is coming from Siberia. And these are the forces that Churchill was deploying to divide Russia. So there's a very long history in this. This did not develop in 2022, February 24th. It did not develop even in the Maidan in 2014. This is the outlook of the British Empire and of Winston Churchill. And we have to start to internalize that you have actors who have acted on these things because they hate Russia, this and that. But the higher reality is the British. And Americans will jump into this with all 4 feet. You don't have, Tony Blinken, Joe Biden, but so what? They didn't originate the problem. This is policy. This is long before. Okay, next, please. So, second point, I mentioned 2 policies that we're seeing in Israel, Iran, the Ukraine attacks, and the attempt to get a war going between China and Taiwan, which is not going to be, no one's fooled by who would win that war, but the Chinese don't want that war with Taiwan. They don't want the war at all. Taiwan is a province of China. They don't want to attack their own provinces, but there are people who want that. So I said the first thing was that you would have a permanent war. Well, we saw where this doctrine comes from. The second is this. On July 16th, 1945, Operation Trinity happens. Many people went to see the film on Oppenheimer. And there in the white sands of Alamogordo, New Mexico, at the U.S. testing site, at 5:29 in the morning, a penetrating, piercing, bright light lights up the whole area, and the first nuclear bomb is tested successfully. 2 days later, President Truman, by a very simple signal system, communicates this to Winston Churchill. So that's the 18th. On the 23rd, Churchill decides that he's going to wants the West to use a nuclear bomb to bomb Russia. So here's the quote. It's from Alan Brooke, and you saw him earlier. He was the head of the Chiefs of Staff of the Army. They call it the British Imperial Staff, but it's the name the British used for their army. So let's look at the second 2 sentences. Let's do it. Churchill absorbed all the minor American exaggerations of the war as a result, was completely carried away. It was now no longer for the Russians to come into the Japanese war. The new explosive alone was sufficient to settle the matter. That's Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The most important person in the world for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is Winston Churchill. I will show you that in a second. But let's concentrate on this. This is what Sir Alan Brooke in his diaries reports Churchill says to him. Furthermore, we now had something in our hands which would redress the balance with Russians. Now we could say to Stalin, if you insist on doing this or that, well, we can just blot out Moscow, then Stalingrad, then Kiev, then Kuibyshev, then Kharkov, Sebastopol. And now, where are the Russians? This is Winston Churchill. Next quote, please. Now, this is also Lord Alan Brooke saying that Winston's appreciation of the atomic bomb's value in the future international balance of power was certainly more accurate than mine. He was, and you'll see the highlighted, that's the only thing I'm going to concentrate on. He was already seeing himself capable of eliminating all the Russian centers of industry and population. Next highlighted part. He at once painted a wonderful picture of himself as the sole possessor of these bombs and capable of dumping them where he wished, thus all-powerful and capable of dictating to Stalin. Now, you have to remember, Winston Churchill is a drunk. He spent about, this is recorded in the book, 30,000 pounds a year, which is a lot of money, a month on alcohol. He was severe manic depression, depressive. Lord Moran described his depressive fits, which would last sometimes days and even into weeks, as the black dog days. He was a complete nut. He was a barely functioning psychotic. And the British vote him up as the most, in a poll that was held about 11 years ago, as the most important person of the 20th century. By the way, Boris Johnson is a biographer of Churchill, the man who intervened to tell Zelensky, don't surrender, don't take a peace deal, not surrender, peace deal. Next, please. This was Lord Moran recording this, and this is just one thing he says. He says, this is Churchill stating to him, Lord Moran, he was the personal physician of Churchill. That's why Moran knew this, and it's confident. America knows that 52% of Russia's motor industry is in Moscow and could be wiped out by a single bomb. It might mean wiping out 3 million people. Next, please. Now you know, by the way, what they tell you, well, coalition of willing, we only want this, we only want that. This is the policy. Wiping out 3 million people in Moscow is a nothing. Now, this is an affidavit, and I won't go through all of this. I've got a ton of stuff on this, but just to make the point, the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was named Senator Stiles Bridges. He was a senator from New Hampshire, very long time in the U.S. Senate from 1937 through 1961. He gave the FBI an affidavit on Churchill. It was not really on Churchill. It was something else. But in the course of filling out this affidavit, Bridges talked about his meeting with Churchill. So it was in the summer of 1947, and he had a private conference with Churchill. Bridges was visiting Europe at that time. And this is what Churchill said in 47. This is 2 years after what I've just shown you. Quote, if an atomic bomb could be dropped on the Kremlin, wiping it out, it would be a very easy problem to handle the balance of Russia, which would be without direction. And what Bridges relates in a signed affidavit to the FBI, I'm not saying the FBI is a great institution, but it's a signed affidavit. He said that he wanted Bridges to go to Truman to have a bomb dropped before Russia had a defense against it, because Russia was totally defenseless. So, next one, please. I will just summarize this for you. This is a quote from a paper that appeared in the International Churchill Society, Churchill in the Cold War. And what it says is for the next 5 years, meaning from 45 through 50, Churchill was still advocating for dropping a nuclear bomb on Russia. Okay, for America to do it. Now, why could Churchill say that he even might have a power of the bomb? Next, please. Because it was a Quebec agreement. The British had something called the British Tube Alloys Project, which is their fancy or not fancy name for their nuclear program. When they merged it into the Manhattan Project, which was the American project for nuclear weapon development to develop the atomic bomb, they called it the Combined Policy Committee. And the agreement stipulated, this is in the second paragraph, that neither country would use nuclear weapons against the other or against other countries without mutual consent. And this was agreed to in August of 1943. So Churchill knew that he could deploy the bomb. He just had to get the agreement with the United States. But the British, for some reasons, which I won't go into historically, had a veto over the bomb. Next, please. Now, when it came up for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this is not part of the story, but it really is, because you have to understand Churchill and you have to understand history. And most of what you've been taught about history is complete and utter nonsense. And Americans have to get on their hind legs and start learning history. 12 out of the 14 American flag staff officers during World War II were against dropping the bomb on Nagasaki, Hiroshima. Dwight Eisenhower was against it. Douglas MacArthur was against it. Nimitz was against it. Unfortunately, Marshall was for it. They were all against it. But they had a joint meeting in July 4th, 1945. The American military was not consulted. Some top sort of Defense Department types were. And Churchill was there. And Churchill said, drop the bomb, just like what was announced by earlier by Diane, saying there are two former MI6 people saying, drop the bomb on Tehran. These things don't go away. This is how policy is really set. And Churchill says in his memoirs, this is volume 6 of Triumph and Tragedy, said, British consent and principle to use of the bomb had been given on July 4th, 1945, before the tests had been taken, that is, before Operation Trinity of July 16th. The final decision now lay in the main with President Truman, who had the weapon. But I never doubted what it would be, nor have I ever doubted since that he was right. And he writes that if he were brought before the pearly gates, he could defend the bomb. That's one of the most important people who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The same nutcase who developed these policies, which we are carrying out today in Iran and so forth. Next, please. Okay, now I just want to say something about World War II. World War II was not to defend the world from democracy. Hitler was put into power. It's a long story. I won't go into it here, but Hitler was put into power by Montague Norman, the head of the Bank of England, and the Jean Marchal. We have written about this in EIR. What was the purpose of the war? The purpose of the war, as Lyndon LaRouche has said, was to have the Russians and Germans exterminate each other. That was the purpose of the war. And if you don't believe me, Max Hastings, who's a well-known historian, so-called respected historian, in a review of books, he says that John Moore Brabazon, this is the quote, who was the head of British aircraft production, was rash enough publicly to state his hope that the Russians and Germans would exterminate each other. That was the principal reason for World War II. I'm not saying there were other reasons. And I'm not saying the British troops and the American troops and others didn't fight valiantly. What happened during World War II, long story short, 65 to 70% of all the deaths of German soldiers occurred on the Eastern Front. They were fought by the Russians who Churchill now wants to invade, who were liberating Europe at that time. So they bore the whole brunt. The British had 10 army groups. Most of them were around the world defending their colonial possessions. I won't say much more than that. Those two things, if you know that about World War II, you know a lot more now. That's what the British were doing, and they were getting the Americans, trying to divert them into fighting in Italy, which was not unessential, but the Americans kept wanting to open the second front, which was called Operation Overlord. They wanted to open it in 43. That Sir Alan Brooke, who I mentioned earlier, was saying we should not open it until 46. And that was to relieve the pressure on the Russians, who were fighting the whole war. Well, not the whole war, with Americans fighting 90% of the war. Next, please. That's just a comment. Now, that's the British Empire at that time in 45. Skip that, please. I'll try and make this quick to try and just bring in a few points. That's the war deaths. You can see Soviet Union, 24,000. Some people say 26. China, 19,000.
Million.
Million. My apologies, million. And you'll see America, and way down there, 418,000. United Kingdom, 450,000. All those soldiers fought gallantly. All of them gave their lives to a higher cause. We're not calling that into question. What we're calling into question is what was the purpose of the war and who did the most, who died because they were under attack because of people like Churchill and others. Thanks. Next, please. Now, a little bit of background of Churchill. Churchill's family comes from the first John Churchill. John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough. And all I want to say is if you want to know who the first Duke of Marlborough is, read the book by Graham Lowry called How the Nation Was Won, because he became the Duke of Marlborough at Blenheim. The Blenheim was created for him in 1704 after he won a battle. He was a butcher. Graham Lowry identifies him for the butcher as a butcher. There are maybe 50 to 70 pages Graham writes about this fellow. He was the one who wanted to suppress the Americans from developing their own and so forth. Churchill, during his years out of office, wrote a 4-volume biography of Duke of Marlborough, John Churchill. He spent 8 years of his life doing it. He admired him up to here. The man who Americans should, if they read Graham Lowry's book, hate. Next. This is Blenheim Palace, where John Churchill was given his dukeship. This is also where Winston Churchill was born. His father had an older brother. If his father's older brother had died or something like that, then his father, Churchill's father, who became Chancellor of the Exchequer in his own right, would have been the Duke of Marlborough, and Churchill would have succeeded. Churchill's wife said that Churchill was the #1 monarchy person in all of Britain. Next, please. This is very brief, but just to give you a little history. So this is Churchill bragging about, and you think policy comes only from the 20th century, or the Rand Corporation, or whomever, or Chatham House. This is Churchill in an 1897 letter where he was in parts of what you would call today Afghanistan. And this is what he talked about fighting the Pashtuns. After today, we began to burn villages, every one, and all who resist will be killed without quarter. The Mohammeds, meaning the Muslims, need a lesson. And there is no doubt we are a very cruel people. That's in a letter to a friend that he's describing because he's over there having a great time. And you can see the book I put up there, the story of the Malacan field force. And then another point. We proceed systematically, village by village, and we destroyed the houses, filled up the wells, blew down the towers, cut down the great shady trees, burned the crops, and broke the reservoirs in punitive devastation. Does that sound like Israel? This is from, okay, next, please. I'm going to skip some other stuff, but I just want, this is his, after he meets with Mussolini, Churchill does it, just two quotes, and then I want to go to what the solution is. Churchill writes in January 1927, he tells a press conference, rather, I could not help being charmed like so many people, other people have been, by his, Mussolini's, gentle and simple bearing, and by his calm, detached poise, in spite of so many burdens. If I had been an Italian, I am sure that I should have been wholeheartedly with you, Mussolini, from start to finish, in your triumphant struggle against the bestial appetites and passions of Leninism. In 1930, Churchill was the finance minister, and he rolled over Mussolini's debt to keep Mussolini in power. The second statement is much more like that, was in, yes, 1930. Next, please. This is about Hitler. This is more about, this is Churchill and the British Eugenics Society. He was a founding member. This is a quote saying that he, of course, wanted the sterilization of degenerates. This is Churchill, the race imperialist, talking about Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi ought to be laid bound hand and foot at the gates of Delhi and then trampled on by an enormous elephant with a new viceroy seated on its back. Gandhiism and everything it stands for will have to be grappled with and crushed. So you can see what Britain thinks about the development. Okay, next, please. Many more things like that. Let's skip this, please, in the interest of time. This is his praise for Hitler. Although one may dislike Hitler's system, and this is 1937, September, the Anschluss, which Hitler takes over Austria, is in March. It's only 6 months away. I mean, this is not like he's doing this in 1934, 35. Kristallnacht has happened. All these things have happened. And this was in the Evening Standard in Britain. One may dislike Hitler's system and yet admire his patriotic achievement. If our country were defeated, I hope we should find a champion as indomitable to restore our courage and lead us back to our place among the nations. I have on more than one occasion, and so forth. And then lastly, on Hitler, when their life is in, he's talking about how all the recruits are stern, grim, frightful. When their life is revealed as a whole, they have been regarded as people like Hitler, as great figures whose lives have enriched the story of mankind. So may it be with Hitler. This is Winston Churchill. Okay, now let me just get to the fight with Roosevelt. I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff. There's much more, but we So next, please. That's Hitler and Truman. Hitler, Churchill. Easy to make it. I'm sorry, my slip. I will just say next, please. They're at the Iron Curtain speech, and I just want to say what most people never read the Iron Curtain speech. The Iron Curtain was not created by Russia. Russia, Stalin, you can debate whether he should have freed the Poles and Czechs and so forth. The reason he was in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary is that after defeating the Nazis at Stalingrad, Leningrad, and in Moscow, the Russians kept marching. Churchill was apoplectic because they were going to free the countries. The Russians freed Auschwitz, Birkenwald, not America, not the British. So he was marching, and they were in all these countries to liberate them, and the Russians were in Germany because they were fighting along with Eisenhower to get the British, Berlin finally liberated from Nazi occupation. So this is his speech, and he paints an iron curtain. He wanted an iron curtain because it would divide the world and make it manipulable, and you couldn't have collaboration like Helga's been calling for between East and West. East and West would have their own pacts and so forth and so on. Next, please. We'll just skip this to go to other things. And but I want to get to the end of this. Next, please. This is part of his whole speech. And then he says, now you can see this. While still pursuing the method of realizing our overall strategic concept, I come to this crux of what I have traveled here to say. He's speaking in Fulton, Missouri. Truman has escorted him out there. Of course, that's in the home state of Truman. Neither the sure prevention of war nor the continuous rise of world organization will be gained without what I call the fraternal association of the English-speaking peoples. This means a special relationship between the British Commonwealth and Empire and the United States. Others have used this phrase, but he reintroduces this. Next, please. I'm just going to pick out the quotes that I think are important so we can get this. Now, he proposes in the speech. People never read the Fulton, Missouri speech. They just say he warned about an iron curtain, which he himself was creating. It should, this special relationship, it should carry with it the continuance of the present facilities for mutual security by the joint use of all naval and air force bases in the possession of either country around the world. That means the British can use any American base. And likewise, he wants to integrate the armies. In fact, as what he says is, eventually, just look at the highlighted thing. Eventually, there may come, I feel eventually there will come, the principle of common citizenship. He wants to integrate America back into the British Empire and the British Commonwealth. He's explicit. Next quote. Skip all this. And he said that if the population of the English-speaking Commonwealth be added to that of the United States, with all that such cooperation implies in air, sea, all over the globe, in industry, there will be no quivering, precarious balance of power to offer its temptation to ambition or adventure. And I left out the quotes that he wants us to literally join the British Commonwealth. That's what he was proposing. He hates Russia.
Said that, wait, did he said this in Fulton, Missouri?
This is all quotes from the Fulton, Missouri speech.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, all people can remember is that Iron Curtain is sinking across Europe. Well, read the speech.
I see. We were going to be locked behind the Iron Curtain with the British.
That's exactly it. So the last thing, if I could just show three more things. This is what Roosevelt wanted to do. First, this is from the quotes David has there. Roosevelt wanted to break the British Empire. This is from As He Saw It. I won't go through it. Many people have seen it. But what Churchill's neck reddened, Mr. President, England does not propose for a moment to lose its favorite position among the British dominions. And then go to the next slide after that one. This is a quote. Many people have seen it, so I'll skip it. So he talks about 20th century methods of industrialization. He says that the British methods are fascist. We're not going to free the world to return to British methods. That's saying British methods are fascist. Last page on this one. It's all that As He Saw It. Yet I can't believe we fight a war against fascist slavery and at the same time not work free people from all over the world from a backward policy. Roosevelt is saying, this is from the meeting aboard a boat off of Newfoundland, August 9th through 12th, 1941, the first meeting that Roosevelt had with Churchill. His son, Elliot Roosevelt, was there, and he wrote a book in 1946 called As He Saw It. Churchill was told by Roosevelt to his face, I will eliminate the British Empire. And Churchill did not forget that. The other two things I just want to mention are this. What Roosevelt wanted to do was he sent special missions to Russia. He sent the mission of Nelson to Russia. He was the head of the War Production Board. He met with Stalin to figure out how they were going to develop Russia. He sent two missions. One was called the Dixie mission. It wasn't Southern. It was just the last name of someone. To China to figure out how we would develop China. Roosevelt's proposal was, as part of Bretton Woods, was to develop the whole world. But he wanted to develop Russia and China in particular. He gave a 10 billion quota to Russia. To get a quota, you had to put money in. Russia put nothing in. This was bigger than the quota he gave to Britain. Put in today's days, inflation's been 23 times. That's 230 billion. Roosevelt was proposing to put 230 billion, a quarter of $1 trillion, into Russia's development. He proposed 5 billion for China. That's 115 billion. And I just want to read you a quote, which is never quoted. This is from the discussions that were held in 1945 when the United States was trying to pass the Bretton Woods Act, because you had to pass it by Congress. It was a treaty. So they got through Congress. And this is what presented by a fellow whose name was Edward Brown. He made this proposal before the University of Chicago. He was a banker. And this is what he said. I just want to give you a sense of this. I won't go through the whole thing. It's much too large. It must be added that a country with a complete system of state trade, such as Russia, does not require credit for strictly stabilization purposes. That's what a lot of the credit of the IMF and World Bank were for. And he's saying, well, they don't need it for that. So what do they need it for? It should be realized that the dislocations in trade caused by the war will inevitably lead to much larger fluctuations in the imports and exports of many countries. It may be added that a country with a complete system of aid does not require credit for stabilization, but it requires it for the development of economic reconstruction, including machine tools and so forth. The United States was going to ship machine tools to Russia, not bomb Russia. And if you read what he says about China, he talks about how, and China was, people know it was a civil war, Chiang Kai-shek, Mao Zedong, won't go into that. But he didn't care. He was going to ship 115 billion in today's dollars because he had all sorts of plans, including building the Three Gorges Dam, what we call now. They sent someone from the Bureau of Reclamation. Last point. What the United States was also doing at the very same time was developing the world. And if we can go to the very last, one of the last slides, and this will be it. People have no idea what was done at the IMF meeting and World Bank. But let's just go down. Okay, up a couple. Up, David. Next one up. Next one up. These are just pictures. I was trying to get the British Empire picture. No, you went to the top. Sorry. I want to get Diane. Okay, next one after that. Next one after that. Maybe it didn't appear. All right, I will just read it to you. It's one sentence. This is from the IMF agreement.
Rich, yeah. You have to speak toward the camera. We can't hear you when you're talking off to the side.
Okay. Churchill tried to wreck the IMF conference. He worked with John Maynard Keynes. This is one quote from Keynes, who was also a member of the British Eugenics Society. Genuine fascist, real fascist. He wrote this in 1944. That's when Bretton Woods occurred. July 1st to July 24th, 1944 in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. That's where Bretton Woods is. This is Keynes. 21 countries have been invited to Bretton Woods, which clearly have nothing to contribute and will merely encumber the ground, namely Colombia, El Salvador, Ecuador, Liberia, Panama, Philippines, Venezuela, Peru, Uruguay, Ethiopia, Iceland, Iran, Iraq, Luxembourg, Dominican Republic. And then he says, this is the most monstrous monkey house assembled for years. So these people are monkeys, these 21 countries that, of course, Roosevelt wanted because he wanted development. But if you read under Article 1, Section 1, the purpose of the bank. This is the Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Now, just read this. This is American system, straight American system. It's Hamilton. The purpose of this will be to assist in the reconstruction and development of territories of members by facilitating the investment of capital for productive purposes, including the restoration of economies destroyed or disrupted by war. That's Europe and Japan. You're going to rebuild war in Japan and Europe. The reconversion of productive facilities to peacetime needs, that will be the United States converting its war production to civilian production, just as Helga Zepp LaRouche is calling for. And the encouragement of the development of productive facilities and resources in less developed countries by encouraging international investment of the productive resources of members, thereby assisting in raising their productivity, the standard of living, and conditions of labor. That was the fight. And so Operation Unthinkable is situated within this larger fight of how we were going to go in the 20th century. Unfortunately, the Beast Man partly won, but we're on the verge of being able to do the same fight today, 80 years later. But we have to eradicate the entire legacy of the British Empire and Beast Man Winston Churchill to do it.
Thank you. This is absolutely devastating, and I really think this material from this report and what you presented has to get out to Americans, because you see what they are trying to impose on the Trump presidency, and I don't think that he is actually aware of where this comes from. I hope he's aware of the perfidious role that the British are playing. As you know, Starmer flew over, was it just before or after the meeting with Zelensky, where Zelensky's behavior was atrocious, probably because he'd been meeting with Senator Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal, or whoever was telling him how to, that he could just bluster his way through. But this is so clear. I mean, there's a couple things I just wanted to say. One, the March 17th, 2007 London Economist is this exact idea, which is where they said, let's look back at the European Union on its 100th anniversary. And we will say, early in the term of Barack Obama, who in March of 2007 there hadn't even been a primary in the election. Right. We'll look back on the presidency of Barack Obama and see that when Russia was poised to invade Ukraine, Obama threatened Russia with nuclear weapons, and Russia backed down. And finally, we got Russia to become part of the European Union. I mean, this is what they write in 2007. That's 7 years before the Maidan, before Victoria Nuland and the Brits overthrew the Ukrainian government and put a bunch of Nazis in there. And then 2022, and you can see that the first 4 years of Trump clearly were somewhat disruptive of this. Ironic that they impeached him for threatening to cut off weapons to Ukraine, which Biden had bragged about bribing them. And you look at where we are right now, it's really stunning. And of course, the strategy toward Iran, I mean, you're right. We're just going to drop a bomb and they're just going to surrender. Now that's worked so well in Iraq, in Libya. Syria, we have an ISIS head chopper in there, but he has a suit on, so we can say that he's a legitimate leader. These people are off their rockers, but I think Americans don't know where this comes from. And when they have that ammunition, then when you have these neocon pigs pushing this and pushing Trump to just go ahead, finish the job, which, by the way, has worked really well for Bibi Netanyahu, who's probably killed a couple 100,000 Palestinians or more, and still hasn't defeated Hamas and won't. Even the head of the IDF, I don't know if he's still the head, but last year had said you can't defeat an ideology, and you certainly can't do it by killing a bunch of children, because that just recruits to the resistance. But this is really something. I just think we have to get it out, but go ahead.
No, I'm glad. And I thought of what you said at the very beginning. I mean, here's the what's his name? Israel Katz, the defense minister, saying, I think that's his first name. This is horrible. They've hit a hospital. You then showed what really happened.
Right.
This is the same guy who ordered or worked with the IDF to blow up all these hospitals with people inside and all the machines you talked about. There's no level that these people won't stoop in their hypocrisy.
But hear that's Churchill. You said beast man, the idea. I mean, this was not metaphor, right? Bind Mahatma Gandhi and have an elephant stand on him. That they meant that literally. That is what they did in Calcutta. I mean, just mowed people down.
Absolutely. absolutely. One thing that was not known, and no, you're absolutely right. This guy was sick. He describes also, I didn't quote it, but he just describes as a matter of fact, oh yes, and we British forces. See, he'd like to go as a soldier, but then he became a reporter, so he could report on it and probably not get shot at too, or so he thought. But in any event, he reports that the British threw Pashtuns, we know are Afghans, into furnaces. He just describes it as a matter alive. They were just thrown in alive. But one thing I just wanted to mention, Diane, is that he Roosevelt, there in 1940 in India, there was a famine, and we don't know how many people died. Helga's references between 1 to 3 million people. This guy Tharoor has talked about it, quoting actually a woman economist who's very, very good. And we don't know how many people died. Now, Roosevelt knew about this. So he sent people over. And in 1942, he sent over a guy named Lewis Johnson. And he's trying to propose to Churchill to give freedom to the Indians, the Indians of the Indian continent. And this is a book called Roosevelt, the Soldier of Freedom by James McGregor Burns. Undaunted, the president now tried a different gambit. Quote, with much diffidence, he wrote to Churchill, in making any suggestion on this subject, which of course all of you good people know far more than I do. This is Roosevelt. He nonetheless suggested that using the American experience, that they set up a confederation in India, which would be headed by a small group representing different castes, occupations, religions, regions, princes, and would be in the public service. And he talks about how this could be related to the 1783 to 1789 Articles of Confederation, which he hated, Roosevelt personally hated, but he was trying to give a way to end this genocide that was going on, because the rations were being sent to British troops, and the Indians were starving. And Churchill exploded, totally exploded, would not let, just, they had to end the mission of Johnson. He had to come back to they ended the mission. So this is, you talk about Bengal famine, you're thinking 1800s, 1890s. This is 1943, 42.
Right. Yes. Now, the other thing that I was thinking about is George Orwell. And I guess I was saying, when was 1984 written? And then it is 1948, right? That was the point, wasn't it? So that
you may know better than I do. I don't know.
I believe that's what he did, was reverse that. So look at what is it? It's perpetual war. You have a perpetual enemy. Total war, this concept. And this is what they're trying to push us into, all of humanity. And what would be really absurd is if the billions of the people on the planet could not organize themselves to get together to defeat this ideology of a tiny handful of really evil SOBs. It just, but that's where people have to learn to put aside some of their differences, most of which, frankly, are artificially generated, and defeat this. But I also was thinking of this, because you reflect, why do we have perpetual war? Why has it been like this? And who decides who the enemy is? I often wonder, well, why didn't we decide that Canada was the enemy? I mean, you could have just picked anyone. Why didn't we decide Australia was you could pick any country and make them the enemy image. I guess the whole point of Russia in particular, China in particular, is their legacy, their contributions to civilization, their development, etc. Why they're picking them. Iran, similarly, a long, very rich history of Persia. India, similarly, I don't know, we're not ready to have a war with India yet, I guess, because they still have a very substantial British influence there. But maybe that'll be next.
I totally agree with you. And to take the point you raised earlier about Trump, look, what happens is people think I'm Trump. I'm making decisions. I'm making the big boy decisions. I'm not going to listen to Tulsi Gabbard. I got the best information. Yeah, from whom? From Netanyahu, who, as we wrote in one of our slugs in one of our briefings, which people can get if they get the EIR alert, that he was also one of the people who was talking up the weapons of mass destruction. But the thing about it is they don't make the decisions because they're acting as and being played upon by the people who really set the rules of the game. And they're given the choices in which they try and slot themselves. Well, will I slot themselves as pro-Iran, pro-Israel? It's wrong.
Well, look at this. I have, because exactly the no kings, the right, no kings. Well, what is it? We have to stand by our allies. Well, what does that mean? Hands off NATO, right? So you think that you're at a rally because you don't like Trump, but what you're actually at a rally for is to make sure we keep arming Ukraine, keep arming Israel, and maybe Trump isn't arming them enough, and that's why we're going to oppose him.
That's precisely it. And who chooses the enemies? That's why uh, I think it's very important. This 1946 speech. Churchill says there's a Cold War. Now, when you have a Cold War, you have the NATO was created in 52. Warsaw Pact is not created for 5 years later. So the idea that Russia was the key. But here's the thing: you have to choose this side, which means one, it's never been a Cold War. It's always the potential of a perpetual war with nuclear weapons. It's always there. Second of all, you can't collaborate. You're told you're not allowed to work with this group because they're here. Poland would have done great. Then Czechoslovakia would have done great to work with France or United States. You're told you're not allowed to. So the very principle of the coincidence of opposites is ruled out, and it's not an accident. They rule it out. They tell you you cannot. We pick the sides. You have one of two sides to pick, and if you're not with this one, then you're with the other one, and you're never asked. And it's the most insane thing. And people like Trump never step back, or others, pick someone from the Democratic Party in the same way, and ask themselves the question you asked. It's such a simple question. Well, who told me I couldn't talk to them? Why is that even natural? Who decided that? And they're doing it to America's space program. We can't talk to the Chinese. And this is what we have to take on. And I do think that what the LaRouche movement does by these working on the International Peace Coalition, by our conference, and towards the end of May, is you present the collaborative projects and the principle of one humanity and the principle of cognition. That rules. Nothing else rules. There's nothing else that should interfere with people deciding what they do or don't do. Is it coherent with cognition and with the agapic principle of developing mankind? Because when you develop mankind, you develop the fastest. Trump hasn't figured that out on trade yet. If he would develop Mexico, join with Mexico to develop Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, so forth, we would develop so much faster than by these tariff systems. You can show it. You don't have to, you can show it. So it really is this collaboration, not for the sake of collaboration for the sake of principle for, development. And that's what we're, I think, working so hard to break down. People go, oh, yeah, that's nice. No, it's not nice. Otherwise, you're going to be trapped like Trump. He can't figure things out. He doesn't have a sustained intellect. As you said at one of our meetings in the morning, Colonel McGregor said, he doesn't think deeply. He might have an instinct, and then 2 days later, someone's given him he doesn't think these things through epistemologically.
Right. And that's a terrible weakness, especially when you're your team is very divided. So you have someone giving you a competent assessment like Tulsi Gabbard, and then you have these Christian fundy whack jobs who have, they might have Spanish Inquisition tattoos all over themselves or something or other, and they give a counter briefing. I had seen this article, I forget the name of the guy, somebody Smith or Lee, literally trying to say that Tucker Carlson, Tulsi Gabbard, the people who don't line up, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are not on board with this, war with Iran, are just the same thing as Barack Obama. I mean, talk about sophistry, because this is Barack Obama's war, because Barack Obama was a project of the British Empire. So the people who are opposing it are the ones opposing what Barack Obama gave us. And it's just such nasty sophistry and attempt to divide people and prevent them from thinking clearly. And that's why I think, especially in the 250-year anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the fight just a few days ago was the anniversary of the battle at Bunker Hill, right? This is so critical for people to know. The British Empire was our enemy. And I was thinking, I just did this little short statement yesterday on the various times that Russia came to our aid, from the League of Armed Neutrality, the Navy during the so-called Civil War, World War II, fighting the Nazis. And I had said, why don't we work with Russia a fourth time to save our nation? And then this is so clear, the British, who have been trying perpetually since the time of the American Revolution to destroy us, right? The War of 1812, the so-called Civil War, their treason, as you see. I mean, World War II hasn't ended. We're still fighting the Nazis. The Russians are losing 1 out of 6 people, sacrificing to defeat this. And Churchill is planning to annihilate Russia by dropping a nuclear bomb on them.
Right. And
It's
by
just
invading.
astounding.
And the
Right.
report said elimination. I mean, this is, you could choose any word you want. You could say the defeat of Russia, the overcoming of Russia. But when you put in the word elimination, and your title page has handwritten in Russia threat to civilization, that's a much deeper idea. And I just want to say to people, I didn't go into why they didn't launch Operation Unthinkable. It was largely because the Russians had many larger divisions than the British had at that time. They could not win. They just wouldn't have won. But it didn't mean that they gave up the idea. As Carl Osgood was saying to me, they just couldn't do it. But that doesn't mean they gave it up. They never gave up the idea. They couldn't bomb Russia, but it didn't mean they'd given up the nuclear idea of bombing Russia. And when you go to the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and you're out of office, he was defeated in June of 1945, was announced the results in July of 1945. And this is 1947. You're in Europe. You're cornering the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Stiles Bridges, and you're saying, get Truman to bomb them? This is psychopathic. But and that's why, I totally share your, people say to me sometimes, well, why are you bewildered? We know these people, because they never cease to bewilder. They are so nuts. That's why I think this was developed 80 years ago. I'm not saying Victoria Nuland didn't play a role in Maidan, and other people didn't do important things, and so on. But it has kept the world blocked for 80 years. And right now, we can now make this monumental paradigm shift, which is what Roosevelt wanted to do. You could see everything he was doing with Russia, with China. He put them on the Security Council. He was the one who did it. The British went crazy on that point. Everything he did was, we're going to redevelop the world, and we're going to get rid of. They went hand in hand. So what I would say to people, if you're really, really, really angry at Netanyahu, and yes, you can say this is Zionism because Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism, zero. But if you really want to get back, instead of screaming Zionism 40 times and saying that, Zionists control America, join what Helga is saying. That's the way we're going to do it. We're going to overwhelm them with forces who are already in motion. And they're not, they still have a lot of development, but this is not 1945. They're no longer colonies. They're showing what they can do. The Egyptians' development is magnificent. Nigeria building a refining plant is magnificent. Africa is, as you've said many times, it's going to have 2.5 billion people, and they're going to be geniuses because under 60% of them are going to be under the age of 30. This is what you want a flank. Don't get enraged and keep cursing, Netanyahu. He's a horrible excuse for a human being. I doubt he's human. But the point is, we've got the manpower. Use your head to make the alliances, which will also free every country in the world. They won't have migrants coming because they'll want to be in their own country and build it, which is an exciting proposition for every country. There is a rational way of doing this.
Yes. Now we are at time and we have to wrap up, but I want to really thank you. I hope all this gets written up as soon as possible. We have to get this out. I hope the people watching this share it far and wide. This is urgent. And I do want to also encourage everybody, the way you can get the EIR Daily Alert and the EIR Weekly subscription is to become a sustaining member of the LaRouche organization. If you donate $10 per month or more, you will get in your inbox every day the daily alert, and once a week you'll get the longer article. And I know that Richard will be writing this up for EIR, so it will all be there. And if you want to get it, you should donate and subscribe. And then otherwise, don't be silent. Join us. Helga was right in the Ria Novosti interview. The global south is now about 85% of the world's population. That's why they're so fearful, because the US would tip the balance. If we abandoned the British policy, that would be it. Colonialism would be over. Perpetual war would be over. Our nation and those of us who live here have an incredible responsibility, but also privilege that we can shape the future for millennia to come. And that's really what we have to dedicate ourselves to. So thank you, Richard, and let's do this again sometime.
Okay, great. Good night, Diane.